Whether or not you should use a click track when you're recording is a very controversial subject. Way more controversial than you would think. If you were to Google this, you'll see threads on threads on threads of people going all directions. And mainly, the focus of a lot of their arguments is that if you are a good enough player, the click track essentially is just a guide, and you can still play with as much groove or feel as you can possibly bring to the table simply by playing a little behind the beat or a little in front of the beat. Now, in theory, this makes some sense, but it all, in my opinion, comes down to the context of what kind of band are you and the context within the band of how good is everyone in this band. Specifically, the drummer, the bass player, like the rhythm section, the root rhythm section, rhythm guitar. How tight is everyone and how well rehearsed are you guys? Because there's nothing worse than trying, like from an editing perspective, an engineer's editing perspective, there's nothing worse than trying to edit performances of a band that didn't record to a click track when the band is sloppy enough that they require edits. So if you're good enough where there basically is going to be an entire band playing together. So it depends on so many things. How you record. If you're in a place where you can record drums, bass, and guitar, all at the same time, and if there's more instruments, great. But if everyone can play at the same time and you're going to hit record, it makes less of a difference if you can say you are going to play tight enough that this won't require editing. And not only that, how many overdubs are you planning on doing? What is it going to be on? Are you planning on layering a bunch of things over this? Because everyone that overdubs on top of this is also going to have to play with any of those slight rhythm changes in timing that occur, a couple BPM in either direction as the ebbs and flows of this song progress. So playing along with it in terms of overdubs can be a nightmare, but editing parts is a nightmare when you don't record to a click. So for this reason, I think it became a very popular thing where everybody who goes in the studio winds up, let's turn the click on and, tempo map. Some people like to tempo map where a little bit of speed here, a little like they change the click to create a groove or feel based on what the part needs. And they really get deep with it like that. Now, I come from a place of when I first started recording, there was always a click track. Like the first thing I ever used was a mini disc 4-track. On that mini disc 4-track, the first thing I did was take a synthesizer like a Yamaha, $100 synth and play a generic stock drum beat onto one of the tracks to then use as my click. So I'm always coming from a place of like, that's a locked to the grid type of metronome, even though it's a drum beat. Later, when I started using Pro Tools LE in my own recording setup, I always would find the click first and we would track at that point with the click playing alongside us at all times. I did this for years. It's not until recently that I've started to look at this completely differently. And now I feel like it's real. It's only worth making a recording to me, in my opinion, if I am making a recording for myself, and I will only do it if the drummer is tight enough that we can make a recording without a click track, and we are rehearsed enough that we can make a recording without a click track, knowing we're not going to punch anything in, as if we're recording to tape, essentially, just knowing we're going to hit play. We have to get a solid take. Maybe we'll do it 3 or 4 times and pick the best one, and that's going to be it. So maybe we plan an overdub here or there, but if it doesn't feel extremely solid with everyone playing together, because that's another thing, I don't like the idea of recording everything separately. At the very least, the bare minimum, bass and drums should be recorded at the same time. Once you have a solid bass and drums performance, you can then add things on top of it potentially. And if you don't play bass and you got to do guitar and drums, you may be able to get away with that. But the purpose of making recordings, in my opinion now, is very different than the way I learned for all those years. Like, if I have a band come into the studio that wants to record, I plan on making sure that they are good enough that they could operate that way, or we use a click. Bottom line, I'll always use the click unless they want to not use the click and they know going in there can be no edits. It's only one or the other because editing without the click is a nightmare. And using a click will save you because if the drummer played the part right somewhere, you can usually fly in to save a spot in the song that may have been a disaster or something. So it really depends on the skill level of the guys playing, but what I'm basically saying is if you do make a recording with a click, in my opinion, just because you can play around the groove, because you have these steady, locked in place, this metronome, this grid that's locked, you can manipulate how you play and where the feel is because of that. Like that grid creates your ability to play around it because it's so steady. I agree that's a great thing, but the thing that I realized is the stuff I love the most was recorded without that. I'll give you great examples. Stone Temple Pilots' Vaseline would not be the same song if at the end of the chorus they didn't hold for an extra second before crashing down when he says lean in Vaseline. Somewhere in the Vaseline, that there's a little delay right before that downbeat on the lean. Now that to me makes the song. It wouldn't be nearly as good without it. When you combine this with the rest of the stuff I love, Zeppelin, you've probably seen the Rick Beato video where he quantizes John Bonham, and it sounds bad. It doesn't sound like a bad drummer. It doesn't sound to me as good as when he's not quantized. A little bit of feel there. And I love the way Zeppelin sounds. I love the way Hendrix, when he's playing with Mitch Mitchell, how that sounds. When he was playing with Band of Gypsies also, the drummer in that band was fantastic also. So I just love the way it feels when a drummer can ebb and flow a little bit. Now, I know I'm talking about the best drummers in the world here, right? I know that. I'm not saying that, but in the Beatles, you got a guy like Ringo, who's also, we're talking best drummers in the world, right? But his ability to change the BPM slightly depending on what the song or what that specific performance needed, combined with how tight they were and how well rehearsed they were, made it where that without a click is better than that with a click. The music I like to listen to, for the most part, was not recorded with a click. There's plenty of stuff I'm sure I like that was, but there's a substantial more, there's a greater amount that wasn't. The Chili Peppers' Blood Sugar Sex Magic was not recorded with a click. So when I think about this stuff, and I've heard the stories on all directions. Like I heard the story of Butch Vig talking about how Nirvana, when they did Lithium, Butch had Dave play with a click to it because there was something about the way he was changing the time in either the verse or the chorus or something. So he asked him to play with a click to it, that kind of thing. That song isn't bad. I love the way that song feels. But I also like the way all the stuff feels that doesn't have the click track on it. To me, when music has the ability to move a little bit, it's more alive. And the only reason that doesn't work is when the parts that are moving are not moving with intention. So it's all about the intention of the performance. If it's intentionally a little bit sped up because the part needs that push, then a couple BPM in either direction won't just naturally be like, oh no, they're going 2 BPM faster. This is terrible. It'll make you feel like there's more urgency or rush or something in that part, and it'll make you feel better about hearing it. And you're not going to process why, you're just going to like it. And that's how I look at this thing now, is that I have so many recordings where we used a click track. And without using a click track, considering my band was always one that was very well rehearsed, I just feel like it could have all felt a little bit better. So where I'm at now is I see a huge reason to use a click if I plan on layering everything with one instrument at a time. How you gonna play all the parts with no click and have it all lock up? That seems a little crazy, but if you're not doing one instrument at a time, get as many guys together as you can that are well rehearsed, that know the parts, and then record as much of it as possible and get something that feels good without the click. That's just where I'm at now. Now, I told you it took me a long time to get here. And in my opinion, some guys will need to record for 20 years or so to get to this point where they feel like maybe they shouldn't be using a click. If you've never gone through that, you may need to, because some guys do it just because they can't. They don't want to play to a click because it's hard for them. They lose the click. They can't. Playing with a click for a lot of guys is also very second nature when you've done it for 20 plus years. So I have no problem playing with a click. I just realize it's not better. To have everything locked to a grid is to have everything very predictable, in my opinion. And that little behind the beat, in front of the beat thing that happens when, you manipulate kind of where you're playing on it is not the same as having the ability to fluctuate the tempo a little bit up and down, giving the drummer that control. Because as I mentioned in another video, the drummer can't be a passive participant in the band. They sort of have to be an assertive force. And if something needs to get a little faster, that's great. But it shouldn't just get faster because they're more excited and they just keep making everything faster. So it feels like a roller coaster. And at the end of it, you can't even keep up as a vocalist or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. That's why this is so subjective. If the guys are good enough that you're playing with, you can record without a click and it will feel better. That's what I'm saying. If they're not good enough, you can't. And when I say good enough, I mean time feel. I don't mean chops. You could do all the fills in the world, like so many drummers practice all these fills. But if you don't have the ability to play as if there's a metronome without a metronome playing, I don't care about all your fills. I mean, as a guitarist, I don't care. Play in time. Nothing pisses me off more than a drummer doing a fill and coming in out of time. It's like, what was the point of the fill if you're going to come in out of time? The fill should be just simple enough where time is all you're thinking about when you come back in. Like, that should be your main focus. If you can do a fill while also being in time, then that's awesome. But if you can't, you shouldn't be doing the fill. So the way I think about this is a lot of guys sterilize their recordings unknowingly because maybe you are playing with really tight guys who can do it without it, but you just insist on doing it because you've always done it. Or worse, you've heard somebody say, all bands record to a click. No, they don't. If you were to look this stuff up, you'll find just as many stories of bands that didn't use a click. If your sample size isn't from like 2005 on, you'll find plenty of artists that didn't use a click and have some of the best sounding, best feeling, emotionally driven records historically. You'll also find plenty that did use a click. Like Michael Jackson stuff comes to mind. A lot of times, in order to use drum machines in combination with real drums, because, Sugarfoot is an amazing, talented drummer. A lot of people think he's a drum machine sometimes, but some of the Michael Jackson stuff, there was layers of both. And in order to do that, especially on multiple different drum machines, they had to sync them all up somehow. So it was basically done with a click. So some of that stuff is clicked. I know some of it probably definitely wasn't. Then you get, stuff from people think of like Prince. He recorded a lot without a click, in addition to probably some with a click. Some people think time-based effects require it. Kind of, but not really. Because a lot of times, if you guys know this, if you've mixed, when you set a delay to the BPM of the song, not as good, a lot of times not as good feeling, depending on what you're going for, as setting it by feel, just based on the milliseconds, just dialing it in, rather than putting it to the exact BPM of the track, which can tend to sometimes disappear a little bit because there's parts that maybe play directly on top of it, whereas the other way, you'll get the same thing in terms of feel. Like, that works way more often than you think. A lot of times I'm dialing delays in by hand because I don't want them to be dead locked. It's exactly the same with a time-based delay guitar effect. on a pedal or something. Sometimes locking it in exactly is not the goal. Again, it depends on what you want. But what I'm saying is there's no hard, fast rules. So don't let anybody ever tell you, no, everybody uses a click. Not true. If your mindset is we got to edit this like crazy, then yes, you should use a click. If your mindset is it's got to be perfect, then maybe you want to use a click to try to attempt to make it perfect. Not my goal. My goal is real emotion, raw. Like that's what I want for recordings I make. And as a result, I want the feel to be whatever it has to be. Just like on a lot of Beatles songs, they would fluctuate on different BPM because Ringo is quoted in saying, I am the click. That's the point. You listen to Blackbird and you'll hear a tapping. That tapping is McCartney's foot. There's no metronome happening. His foot was the metronome while he's playing the track. So I'm saying, plenty of amazing recordings. Would they feel as amazing if it was to a click? In my opinion, no, they wouldn't. And a lot of guys do this. They get the click just for the beginning. The drummer will hear the click until he starts playing the song. Then they mute the click, and then it is what it is, so it can ebb and flow, and so it can happen and develop the way that they rehearse it, that they want it to be, however that is. Whatever it needs to be based on that day and how everyone's feeling and whatever. So the click starts them off so they're in the right ballpark zone of what the tempo is, but then they mute it. Tool uses that technique to record a lot. So again, we're talking great drummers, but what are we striving for here? If you're going to well rehearse yourself into making something as great as possible, why not strive for stuff that feels emotionally great also, and maybe leave the click behind? That's just my thought. I know there's plenty of people who are always going to need it, and you know what? Maybe I'll change back to that in another 20 years. But right now, where I'm at, I spent long enough using a click, and I really like I like the idea of my stuff feeling better than just the limited amount of flexibility you have by tempo mapping or by just slightly in front, slightly behind the beat with the grid there. In my opinion, everyone's going to have their own opinion. Let me know what yours is. Throw it in the comments. Hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.